The year was 1875, deep in the Kentucky mountains, where the fog rolled down every morning like a ghostly tide. The hills weren't silent, they whispered, low and mournful, as if remembering every man who'd ever gone beneath them and never returned. At the base of those hills sat Harlan Mine Number 3, where coal dust coated every surface, every lung, every prayer. Men went in with hope and came out hollow-eyed. Among them was Thomas Hale, a 36-year-old miner with hands like worn leather and a heart far too gentle for that brutal place. He was different. Where others cursed their fate, Thomas saw it as a duty. It's honest work, he'd say, tightening the laces on his mud-caked boots each dawn. The mountain gives, and we give back. But the mountain didn't always give back. Sometimes it took. That morning, as the sky blushed pale gold, Thomas kissed his wife Clara goodbye. Their small cabin sat on the edge of the valley, overlooking the endless woods. "One more season, Clara," he murmured, brushing coal dust from her cheek. "Just one more season, and we'll leave this life behind." Clara smiled faintly, but didn't answer. She'd heard those words every year since their wedding day. As Thomas walked away, his silhouette melted into the fog. The hills seemed to swallow him whole. Inside the mine, darkness wasn't just the absence of light. It was alive. It breathed and groaned and clung to your skin. Most men cursed it. But Thomas Hale, he sang to it. He had a habit of humming old hymns his mother taught him, his voice soft but steady. "Tom, you're mad," said Elias Burke, his closest friend, swinging his pickaxe. "You'll wake the ghosts," Thomas chuckled. "Then maybe they'll lend a hand." He worked with a rhythm, patient, precise. When younger miners grew reckless or greedy, chasing bigger chunks of coal, Thomas reminded them, "The mountain rewards respect. Don't take more than it gives." He was the kind of man everyone trusted. When a beam cracked, when water seeped too fast, it was Thomas who stayed calm. "Tom Hale," the foreman once said, "you've got dust in your veins and light in your heart." No one knew how true those words would become. Back home, Clara Hale kept busy, mending clothes, tending the small garden, and waiting for Thomas's familiar whistle down the path. The mountains surrounded their cabin like sleeping giants, and sometimes she felt small beneath their gaze. In her apron pocket she carried a letter that had arrived 3 years ago. A letter from Henry Hale, Thomas's older brother, written shortly before he died in a mining accident out west. The letter read, "Don't let Tom dig too deep. He's got a heart that doesn't quit even when it should. Some things are buried for a reason." Clara had never told Thomas about that letter. It felt like carrying a secret prayer or a curse. Every evening she'd sit on the porch, staring toward the distant mine. When the wind blew just right, she thought she could hear the clang of the pickaxes echo through the trees, like a heartbeat pulsing beneath the earth. One damp morning, as the men gathered near the shafts, talk spread about a hidden vein, a rich, untouched layer of coal deep below the old tunnels. "Found it near the Devil's Hollow," said one miner, eyes wide. "Coal so black it shines blue. Ain't been touched since the first strike," Elias spat into the mud. "Devil's Hollow? That place is cursed. My granddad said men heard voices down there." Thomas listened quietly, intrigued but cautious. Maybe the mountain's just warning them to stay away. But that night, the thought gnawed at him. What if that hidden vein was real? What if he could finally give Clara and little Samuel the life they deserved? As he lay beside his wife, staring at the flickering oil lamp, he whispered to himself, "Just one more dig. One more." The mountain, somewhere in the distance, rumbled softly, as if it had heard him. Samuel Hale was only 8, but his heart beat with the same stubborn hope as his father's. Every afternoon he sat by the fogged window, his small hands pressed against the glass, waiting for the glow of his father's lantern to appear on the path. When he saw it, he'd burst through the door shouting, "Papa's home!" and run down the dirt road barefoot, laughing. Thomas would lift him up, twirling him in the air despite the weariness in his bones. One evening, Samuel asked, "Papa, do the mountains ever get lonely?" Thomas smiled. "Sometimes, Sam. That's why we talk to them when we work, so they know they're not alone." Samuel nodded, eyes wide. "Then you must be their favorite." Thomas laughed, but Clara, listening from the porch, felt a shiver crawl down her spine. 2 weeks later, while clearing an abandoned shaft, Thomas's pick struck something strange, a hollow thud instead of solid rock. The sound echoed like a heartbeat. "Tom, you hear that?" Elias asked, raising his lantern. Thomas knelt and brushed the dust away, revealing a small opening in the stone. An old, forgotten tunnel, sealed long ago. A faint, warm breeze drifted out, carrying the smell of earth and something faintly metallic. The air felt alive. That night, long after the others had gone, Thomas returned alone. He crouched near the sealed entrance, lantern flickering. He whispered, "Show me what you're hiding, old mountain." The ground beneath him gave a low moan, almost like a sigh. The flame in his lantern wavered, but did not go out. When dawn broke, Thomas was already deep inside the forgotten passage. He'd widened it just enough to squeeze through, his lantern casting trembling light across walls streaked with glittering veins. Not of coal, but something that shimmered gold beneath the soot. He ran his hand across it. "This isn't coal," he murmured. "It's something else." Elias found him later, covered in dust and grinning like a madman. "Tom, are you insane? The foreman'll hang you for breaking clearance." Thomas just smiled. "This tunnel, it's not on any map. The mountain hid it, and I think I know why." He told Elias he was going to follow it deeper the next day. "Tom," Elias said, voice low, "the deeper you dig, the more she groans. The mountain don't like being woken." Thomas's eyes gleamed in the lantern light. "Then I'll dig gently." That night, sleep refused to come. When it finally did, Thomas dreamt of Henry, his older brother. Henry stood in the dark tunnel, his face pale, his eyes filled with sorrow. "You shouldn't be here, Tom," he whispered. "You're walking the same path I did." Thomas reached out. "I couldn't save you, Henry, but maybe I can find what you left behind." The ground in the dream began to shake. The walls collapsed around them, and Thomas woke with a gasp, drenched in sweat. He slipped quietly out of bed, sat on the porch and stared at the stars. Clara found him there an hour later. "You're dreaming of him again," she said softly. He nodded. "I keep hearing him, Clara. Down there." "Then stop digging," she pleaded. Thomas looked at her, the woman he loved more than life, and said the words she feared most. "I can't." The next day, Mr. Briggs, the gruff mine foreman, cornered Thomas near the shaft entrance. "I hear you've been poking around where you shouldn't," Briggs growled. "That old passage is sealed for a reason. You value your life, you stay out of it." Thomas stood his ground. "There's something down there, sir. I can feel it." Briggs slammed his ledger shut. "You dig one more inch in that cursed hole, and you're done here. You hear me?" Thomas nodded silently. But when the shift ended, he didn't go home. Instead, he stood by the sealed tunnel, lantern in hand, staring into the darkness. The air whispered his name. "Tom. Tom." He took one step inside, then another. The mountain groaned as if it were waking from a long, uneasy sleep. That evening, Clara prepared a small pot of stew, thick and fragrant, with wild herbs Samuel had gathered. Thomas sat at the table, his hands blackened from coal dust, his eyes distant. "You're not eating," Clara said softly. He smiled faintly. "Just thinking." "About the mine?" He hesitated, then reached across the table and took her hand. "Clara, if I don't come home tomorrow—" "Don't!" she interrupted sharply. "Don't say that. Just listen," he insisted. "If I don't come home, tell Samuel his father was trying to make the world better for him. Tell him I dug deep because I believe something good was buried there." Her eyes filled with tears. "You don't have to prove anything to us, Tom." He squeezed her hand. "I'm not proving anything. I'm finishing something." That night, as the wind howled through the cracks in their cabin, Clara held him tightly, as if her embrace could anchor him to the world above. But when morning came, Thomas Hale was already gone. A single lantern swinging in the mist as he disappeared into the hills, never knowing it would be his last sunrise. The mine was silent that morning, save for the distant dripping of water and the muffled thud of Thomas Hale's boots. He descended alone, his lantern swaying with each cautious step. The others were still at breakfast, unaware that he'd slipped past the guards and into the forbidden shaft. The tunnel seemed endless, the air heavier the farther he went. The flame in his lantern flickered strangely, not from wind, but from pressure. It was as though the mountain itself was breathing around him. Then he found it. The passage opened into a vast chamber glittering like a cathedral made of black glass. The walls shimmered faintly, veins of golden mineral pulsing with an almost living light. Thomas stepped closer, his breath catching. "This isn't coal," he whispered. "This is something else entirely." He knelt to touch it, and for a moment the earth beneath him throbbed, a deep vibration that rattled his bones. He stumbled backward, staring into the darkness where the glow seemed to grow stronger. The mountain was alive, and it was awake. Still, Thomas smiled. Maybe this is what I was meant to find. Above ground, the foreman realized Thomas was missing. Elias grabbed a lantern and rushed toward the off-limits shaft, shouting his friend's name. "Tom, where are you, you fool?" Deep below, Thomas began to hear cracks, subtle at first, like dry twigs snapping, then louder. The chamber groaned, the floor quaking beneath his feet. "Not now," he gasped, turning to run. The walls erupted in thunderous sound, stones raining from the ceiling. His lantern fell, shattering on the ground, its light snuffed out. Darkness swallowed him whole. He clawed through the dirt, coughing, praying for air. The tunnel behind him was gone, crushed under tons of earth. As the final rocks tumbled down, Thomas whispered one last word, "Clara." Then the mountain was silent again. When the first blast of the collapse reached the surface, the miners froze. Dust and screams filled the air. Elias was first to react, sprinting toward the shaft. "Tom's down there," he shouted. The rescue effort began within the hour. Men dug until their hands bled, calling out Thomas's name between each strike. For 3 days they worked tirelessly, clearing debris inch by inch. Clara arrived on the second day, Samuel in her arms. She stood outside the barricades, her face pale but her eyes burning with hope. "He's alive," she kept whispering. "He has to be." On the 5th day, the foreman ordered the search to stop. "There's no air left down there," he said. "No man could survive that long." Clara didn't move. She just stared at the dark hole in the ground as if her gaze alone could pull her husband back. When night fell, she whispered to the hills, "Bring him home, please." The wind howled in reply. A week later, as workers cleared the final layers of rubble, one of them shouted, "Something's here." They unearthed a small cracked lantern, Thomas's lantern, still faintly glowing with light. "How is that possible?" Elias murmured, holding it up. The glass was scuffed, the metal bent, but inside, the wick still glimmered with a soft golden hue, as though the flame refused to die. He carried it to Clara's cabin that night. "This was his," he said quietly. "I found it near where the collapse ended." Clara held the lantern close, pressing her forehead to the glass. "It's still warm," she whispered through tears. "Maybe he was close to getting out," Elias offered. Clara shook her head slowly. "Or maybe he found what he was looking for." That night she placed the lantern on the windowsill. Its faint glow filled the room like a heartbeat. Winter came early to the mountains that year, blanketing the town in white silence. The mine closed for the season. The earth had claimed too many lives already. Samuel stopped waiting by the window. He rarely spoke of his father, though every so often he'd sneak into the woods and sit by the mine entrance, listening to the faint echoes from below. One evening, as the snow fell thick and quiet, Clara sat by the fire with the lantern beside her. The flame within it still burned softly, though no one had ever refueled it. She thought she heard a sound, faint, rhythmic tapping, like a pick striking stone. Her breath caught. "Tom?" she whispered, but the sound faded into the howling wind outside. She clutched the lantern to her chest and cried, not out of fear but love, the kind that even time couldn't bury. Years passed. Samuel grew tall and broad-shouldered, the spitting image of his father. He learned to work the land, to fix tools, to live simply. But he never forgot the mine, or the man who'd gone too deep. One day, a letter arrived from Elias Burke, now an old foreman living 2 towns over. The handwriting was shaky but familiar. "Samuel, before your father vanished, he told me something. He wasn't digging for coal or gold. He said he was trying to find where his brother Henry died. He wanted to bring him home. I told him it was madness, but your father was never a man to quit. Whatever people say, know this. He didn't die chasing wealth. He died chasing family." Samuel's hands trembled as he folded the letter. All his life, he'd believed his father's obsession with digging was about money. But now, he saw it differently. His father hadn't been lost. He had chosen to go deeper, for love, for blood, for closure. By the time Samuel was 21, the mine was abandoned. Nature had reclaimed the hills, covering the scars of man's greed with moss and quiet. But Samuel couldn't let the story end there. Armed with new tools and the same fire that once burned in his father's heart, he decided to return. Elias, now gray and frail, met him at the edge of the woods. "If you go in there," he warned, "you may not come back either." Samuel smiled sadly. "Then maybe that's where I belong." For 3 days he dug through the sealed shaft, carefully clearing the rubble his father once fought beneath. The deeper he went, the more the air grew warm and heavy, and a faint glow began to emerge, golden, pulsing through the cracks in the stone. Finally, he broke through. Samuel stepped into the same vast chamber his father had discovered decades earlier. The air shimmered with that strange golden mineral, still glowing faintly as though it remembered. And then he saw them. 2 skeletons lay side by side near the wall, one larger, one smaller. The larger clutched a rusted pickaxe. The smaller wore the remnants of a miner's tag. Samuel brushed the dirt away, revealing the faded engraving, "Henry Hale." He sank to his knees, tears streaming down his face. "You found him, Papa," he whispered. "You brought him home." From his satchel, Samuel pulled out the old lantern his mother had kept all those years. He set it gently between the 2 skeletons and lit it. The flame burned brighter than ever before. Strong, steady, and impossibly alive. The light filled the chamber until it looked as if the entire mountain had taken a breath of relief. For the first time in half a lifetime, the mountain was silent. not in grief, but in peace. When Samuel returned to town, he brought with him only one thing, a small piece of stone from the glowing chamber. He buried it with his father and uncle on the hillside overlooking the valley. Word spread quickly. The townsfolk gathered, old miners among them, heads bowed. Elias, now too weak to stand for long, spoke at the graveside. "He dug too deep," he said softly, "but not for gold, not for glory. He dug for love, the kind of love that don't die, even when the body does." From that day forward, every miner who entered Harlan Valley was told the story of Thomas Hale, the man who dug too deep and never returned, not as a warning, but as a reminder that some treasures are worth any darkness. Years later, travelers passing through the Kentucky mountains often stopped by the old Hale graves. The wind there always carried a faint hum, a rhythm like distant mining tools striking rock. They said that every night, Thomas Hale's lantern still glowed softly between the two graves, though no one ever touched it. Not a candle, not a trick of light, a steady golden flame that refused to die. Some said it was a ghost. Others said it was the mountain's heart, still beating. But Clara Hale, before she passed, left behind a note found tucked beneath her pillow. It read, "The lantern isn't haunted. It's a promise kept. He said he'd bring light home to us." And he did. And so, the tale of the miner who dug too deep and never returned lived on. Not as a story of loss, but of love that defied darkness, and a flame that kept burning long after the hands that lit it were gone.